My name is Brooke, and at 28 years old, I never imagined my own mother would abandon me when I needed her most. As I lay writhing in pain on that hospital bed, clutching my abdomen while doctors prepared for emergency surgery, my mother looked at the medical staff and said those words that still haunt me: "Let's go home, she'll be fine." What she didn't know was that her decision that day would expose a secret so shocking it would destroy everything. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how this unbelievable story unfolded, because what my mother did goes beyond anything you could imagine. Life before that terrible November day had its challenges, but I thought I'd finally found my rhythm. Working as a registered nurse at Seattle General Hospital wasn't just my job, it was my calling. Every morning when I put on those scrubs, I felt purpose. My patients often told me I had healing hands, and honestly caring for others came naturally to me. Maybe because I'd learned early in life that sometimes you have to be your own source of comfort. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. Nothing fancy, just a cozy space with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in the morning light. I'd been financially independent since I was 22, something I took pride in, even though it meant counting every penny some months. My kitchen table was second-hand. My couch came from a garage sale. But everything in that apartment was mine, bought with money I'd earned myself. My relationship with my mother, Linda, had always been complicated. She was 55 now, still living in the same house in Bellevue where I'd grown up. From the outside, she looked like the perfect suburban mother, always well-dressed, active in her book club, never missing Sunday service at the local Methodist church. But behind closed doors, our relationship felt more like a business transaction than a mother-daughter bond. The complexity started long before my father died. Even when Dad was alive, Mum played favourites, though she'd never admit it. My younger sister Jessica could do no wrong in her eyes. When Jessica broke Mum's favourite vase at age 8, it was an accident. When I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet at 10, I was careless and irresponsible. These might sound like small things, but they added up over the years, creating an invisible wall between us. Dad tried to balance things out. Thomas Brooks was a gentle soul who worked as an accountant for 30 years at the same firm. He'd come home every evening at 6:15 sharp, kiss Mum on the cheek, then find me wherever I was doing homework and ask about my day. He taught me to ride a bike, helped with math homework, and never missed a single school play or soccer game. When he died in a car accident when I was 12, I lost my only real advocate in the family. The night we got the call about Dad's accident remains crystal clear in my memory. A drunk driver had run a red light hitting Dad's car on the driver's side. He died instantly, they said, which was supposed to be a comfort. Mum collapsed in the hallway when the police officer told us. Jessica, only 9 at the time, clung to me crying. I stood there feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet, but somehow managed to stay upright to be strong for everyone else. After Dad died, the favoritism became more pronounced. Mum channeled her grief into protecting Jessica, her baby girl. Meanwhile, I was told to be strong, to help out more, to not cause problems. At 12 years old, I became the family stabilizer, the one who made sure Jessica got to school, who cooked dinner when Mum had one of her bad days, who kept everything running. The differences in how Mum treated us became even starker as we got older. When Jessica wanted to go to law school, Mum immediately offered to pay her tuition at the University of Washington. She bought Jessica a brand new Honda Civic for her 21st birthday, saying a future lawyer needed reliable transportation. The day Jessica graduated, Mum threw a party that probably cost $10,000, inviting everyone she knew to celebrate her brilliant daughter, the attorney. My journey was different. When I decided to become a nurse, Mum's response was lukewarm at best. She suggested I consider being a medical assistant instead, since the training was shorter and cheaper. When I insisted on getting my Bachelor of Science in Nursing, she shrugged and said I'd have to figure out how to pay for it myself. So I did. I took out student loans, worked nights at a grocery store, and studied during every break. I bought a 15-year-old Toyota Corolla with rust on the doors for $2,000 I'd saved up. When I graduated nursing school, Mum attended the ceremony but left early saying she had a headache. Despite everything, I kept trying to build a relationship with her. I called every Sunday evening, even when she spent most of the conversation talking about Jessica's latest accomplishments. I sent flowers on Mother's Day, bought thoughtful Christmas presents, and always remembered her birthday. Part of me kept hoping that one day she'd see me, really see me, and realize that I was worthy of her love too. Jessica and I had a complicated relationship as well. She wasn't a bad person, just oblivious to the different ways we'd been raised. She genuinely didn't understand why I couldn't just ask Mum for money when I was struggling to make rent during nursing school. She thought I was being proud when I declined Mum's offer to buy me a designer dress for her law school graduation, not realizing Mum had only offered because she didn't want me to embarrass her in front of her friends. 2 months before everything fell apart, something unexpected happened. Mum called me on a Tuesday evening, not our usual Sunday call time. Her voice sounded different, warmer somehow. She wanted to have dinner, just the two of us, that Friday night. No Jessica, no discussion of Jessica's cases or her new boyfriend. Just us. I spent 3 days wondering what was happening. Was she sick? Did she have news about something? But when Friday came, she seemed perfectly healthy. We went to a nice Italian restaurant in downtown Seattle, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list thicker than a novel. Mum ordered a bottle of Chianti and actually asked about my work. For 2 hours she listened as I told her about my patients, about the satisfaction of helping people heal. She asked questions about medical procedures, seemed genuinely interested in the daily challenges of working in the cardiac unit. When I mentioned I'd been nominated for Employee of the Quarter, she actually smiled and said she was proud of me. Those 3 words, "I'm proud of you," were so rare from her lips that I had to blink back tears. As we waited for dessert, she reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers felt soft and warm, and for a moment I was transported back to being 5 years old, before everything got complicated, when she used to hold my hand crossing the street. She told me she'd been thinking a lot lately about our relationship, about how maybe she hadn't always been the mother I needed. She didn't apologize exactly, but it felt like an acknowledgement, a crack in the wall between us. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe people really could change. Maybe losing Dad had been so traumatic for her that she'd shut down emotionally, and now finally she was ready to open up again. I started imagining holidays where I didn't feel like an outsider, family dinners, where my accomplishments were celebrated too, a future where I had a real mother. The next few weeks reinforced this hope. Mum called more frequently, and not just on Sundays. She'd text me funny memes during the day, something she'd never done before. When I mentioned I was nervous about a presentation I had to give to the hospital board about implementing new cardiac protocols, she offered to help me practice. We spent 3 hours on a video call with her, playing the role of board members, asking tough questions. I started making plans for Thanksgiving, our first real family holiday, that felt like it might actually be enjoyable. I researched recipes for Mum's favourite sweet potato casserole, the one her mother used to make. I even went to an expensive kitchen store and bought a serving dish specifically for it, imagining Mum's face when she saw I'd remembered this detail from her childhood. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I splurged on a gift for her. It was a cashmere scarf from Nordstrom, soft grey with subtle silver threading. Cost me $300, which was more than I usually spent on groceries for a month, but I wanted to show her that I valued our improving relationship. I wrapped it in beautiful paper and hid it in my closet, planning to give it to her at Thanksgiving dinner. Looking back, I should have been suspicious. People don't fundamentally change that quickly, but I wanted so desperately to believe that my mother finally saw me as worthy of her love that I ignored any warning signs. When she asked oddly specific questions about my health insurance during one call, I thought she was just showing concern. When she mentioned that she'd updated her will recently, I assumed she was being responsible about estate planning. Monday morning, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, started like any other day. I woke up at 5:30, showered, and put on my favorite scrubs, the ones with tiny hearts on them that a grateful patient's family had given me. I stopped at my usual coffee shop where Marcus the barista already had my order ready, medium dark roast with 1 sugar, no cream. The cardiac unit was busy but manageable, with 12 patients under our care. Around 10 that morning, I was checking on Mr. Patterson, a 70-year-old recovering from bypass surgery, when the pain hit. It started as a dull ache in my lower right abdomen, the kind you might get from eating something questionable. I ignored it, focusing on adjusting Mr. Patterson's IV drip and chatting with him about his grandchildren. But within minutes, the dull ache transformed into something sharper, like someone was stabbing me with a hot knife. I must have gasped because Mr. Patterson looked alarmed. His heart monitor started beeping faster, reflecting his anxiety. I tried to smile to reassure him everything was fine, but another wave of pain doubled me over. The knife feeling spread across my entire abdomen, and I could feel sweat breaking out on my forehead. My hands started shaking as I gripped the bed rail for support. Maria, my colleague and closest friend at work, happened to walk by the room. She took one look at me and immediately went into nurse mode. Maria was 45, a mother of 3 teenagers, and had been nursing for 20 years. Nothing rattled her. She gently but firmly guided me out of Mr. Patterson's room while calling for another nurse to take over. Her hand on my back was steady, but I could see concern in her dark brown eyes. In the hallway, I tried to straighten up to insist I was fine, maybe just needed some water. But when I tried to walk, the pain exploded through my body like fireworks. My vision went fuzzy around the edges, and I heard Maria calling for a wheelchair. Everything after that became a blur of movement and voices. Maria wheeled me to the elevator, her hand squeezing my shoulder, telling me everything would be okay. The emergency department was only 2 floors down, but it felt like a different world. Up in cardiac, I was the caregiver. Down here, I was suddenly the patient. They got me onto a bed, and Dr. Harrison appeared within minutes. James Harrison was one of our best emergency physicians, someone I'd worked with occasionally when cardiac patients came through the ED. He was thorough, methodical, and had a calm demeanor that put patients at ease, but I could see worry in his expression as he examined me. The pain was getting worse, radiating from that focal point in my lower right abdomen. When Dr. Harrison pressed gently on the area, I nearly screamed. He ordered blood work stat and a CT scan. While we waited for the results, Maria stayed with me holding my hand. She'd called up to our unit manager to say she was staying with me, and nobody questioned it. That's the thing about being a nurse. Your colleagues become your family, especially when you don't have much of a real one. The CT scan involved being wheeled through the hospital corridors I walked every day, but from a completely different perspective. Lying on that gurney, looking up at the fluorescent lights passing overhead, I felt vulnerable in a way I never had before. The radiology tech, someone I'd seen in the cafeteria dozens of times, but never really talked to, was gentle as she positioned me for the scan. The machine was cold and imposing, and I had to hold my breath multiple times while it whirred around me. Doctor. Harrison returned with the results faster than I expected. His face told me everything before he spoke. Acute appendicitis, he said, with significant inflammation. The appendix was enlarged and angry-looking on the scan. We needed to operate within the next few hours before it ruptured. A ruptured appendix could lead to peritonitis, sepsis, potentially death. I knew all this academically, had cared for patients with similar conditions, but hearing it about my own body was surreal. They started an IV pushing fluids and antibiotics. The surgical resident came to explain the procedure, even though I knew exactly what a laparoscopic appendectomy entailed. 3 small incisions, removal of the appendix, probably an overnight stay if everything went smoothly. Simple routine, except when it's happening to you. The anesthesiologist stopped by next to a woman I'd seen around but never worked with directly. She was kind, explaining everything, even though she could see from my badge I was a nurse. It was around noon when I realized I needed to call my family. My phone was in my locker upstairs, so Maria lent me hers. I stared at it for a full minute before dialing Mum's number. Part of me wondered if I should call Jessica instead, but Mum had been so different lately, so caring. Surely she'd want to know her daughter was about to have emergency surgery. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. Her voice sounded irritated, like I'd interrupted something important. When I told her where I was, that I needed surgery, there was a long silence. Then she asked in a tone that suggested she didn't quite believe me if it was really that serious. Couldn't I just take some antibiotics and go home? I explained, my voice shaking from pain and emotion, that this was emergency surgery, that appendicitis wasn't something you could treat with just antibiotics once it was this advanced. Another long pause. Then she sighed, the kind of sigh she used to make when I asked for help with homework as a kid. She said she'd be there in an hour. The hospital was only 30 minutes from her house in Bellevue, even with traffic, but I didn't point that out. I was just grateful she was coming. Before hanging up, I asked if she could call Jessica. Mum said Jessica was busy with a big case, probably couldn't get away. The dismissive way she said it stung, but I pushed the feeling aside. After ending the call, I tried to rest, but the pain made it impossible. Maria stayed beside me, occasionally wiping my forehead with a cool cloth, telling me stories about her teenagers to distract me. She didn't mention my mother's response, but I could see questions in her eyes. Most families would rush to the hospital immediately. Most mothers would sound panicked, not annoyed. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. The surgical team was ready, but I kept asking for a few more minutes, sure Mum would arrive any second. Dr. Harrison was getting concerned. The longer we waited, the higher the risk of rupture. Finally, at the 2-hour mark, the elevator doors opened and Mum walked in. She was dressed impeccably as always. Her blonde hair, maintained religiously at an expensive salon, was perfectly styled. She wore a cream-colored blazer over dark jeans, her designer handbag coordinating perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, like she'd just come from a photo shoot, rather than rushing to her daughter's emergency bedside. The contrast between her polished appearance and my sweaty, pain-racked state couldn't have been starker. Mum stopped just inside the doorway of my emergency bay, her eyes scanning the room with an expression of distaste. The emergency department was busy with the sounds of other patients and medical equipment creating a constant background noise. She wrinkled her nose slightly, whether from the antiseptic smell or general displeasure I couldn't tell. When she finally looked at me, there was no warmth in her eyes, no maternal concern, just inconvenience. Her first words weren't asking how I was feeling or if I was scared. Instead, she complained about the parking situation. Apparently the visitor lot had been full, and she'd had to park in the garage 3 blocks away. Her feet hurt from walking in her designer heels, she said, and couldn't the hospital provide better accommodations for visitors? Maria's grip on my hand tightened slightly, the only indication of her reaction to my mother's priorities. Mum settled into the chair furthest from my bed, despite there being one right beside me. She pulled out her phone immediately, scrolling through something with focused attention. When she did glance up, it was to ask how long this was going to take, because she had a dinner reservation at 7 with her book club friends. It was barely 2 in the afternoon, but apparently she needed time to go home and change first. A nurse came in to check my vitals and verify insurance information. When she asked Mum about my insurance details, Mum looked up from her phone with an expression of annoyance. She's 28 years old. Mum said, her tone implying the nurse was stupid for even asking. She handles her own insurance. I manage everything myself. The nurse looked confused, probably wondering why Mum was even there if she wasn't going to act like a concerned parent. I provided my insurance information, my voice strained from pain. The nurse was kind, patting my arm gently before leaving. Mum went back to her phone without commenting. Maria excused herself to use the restroom, but I knew she was really giving us privacy, hoping maybe Mum would show some emotion once we were alone. But the silence stretched between us, broken only by the beeping of monitors and Mom's occasional sighs of impatience. Dr. Harrison returned to check on me, and that's when everything started to unravel. He explained again this time, directing his words to Mom, since she was my emergency contact, that I had acute appendicitis requiring immediate surgery. The appendix was significantly inflamed and could rupture at any moment. Once it ruptured, the situation would become life-threatening. Bacteria would spill into my abdominal cavity, causing peritonitis. We needed to operate within the next 2 hours maximum. Mum looked up from her phone, and her next words made everyone in the room freeze. What if we just give her some antibiotics and go home? She asked it casually, like she was negotiating a restaurant substitution, not discussing her daughter's life-threatening condition. I think she's being a bit dramatic about the pain. She's always been sensitive that way. Dr. Harrison's professional composure cracked slightly. He blinked several times as if trying to process what he'd heard. Then in a tone that was carefully controlled, but clearly strained, he explained that antibiotics alone were not an option at this stage. The appendix was too inflamed. Without surgery, it would rupture and I could die. He emphasized the word die, making sure Mum understood the gravity of the situation. Mum rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes like a teenager being told to clean her room. Hospitals always want to do surgery, she said. It's how they make money. I'm sure if we just took her home with some pain medication, she'd be fine by tomorrow. She's always been dramatic about these things. When she was 8, she cried for hours over a paper cut. I couldn't help it. Tears started rolling down my cheeks. Not just from the physical pain, which was excruciating, but from the emotional wound of hearing my mother dismiss my suffering so callously. Maria had returned and stood in the doorway, her mouth slightly open in shock. Even in the busy emergency department where staff had seen every type of family dysfunction, my mother's behaviour was attracting attention. Dr. Harrison tried again, his voice taking on an edge of urgency. Mrs. Brooks, he said your daughter is seriously ill. This is not a minor condition we're discussing. Without surgery, the mortality rate is significant. Even with surgery, if we wait too long and the appendix ruptures during the procedure, complications increase dramatically. I strongly advise you to support your daughter's medical care. Mum stood up, clutching her designer bag like it was a shield. She looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't just indifference, it was almost disgust. Like I was an inconvenience she wished would just go away. You're being ridiculous, Brooke, she said. You always have to make everything about you. First you insist on this nursing career when you could have done something easier, and now you're making a scene over a stomachache. The pain chose that moment to spike. and I curled into a ball on the bed, sobbing. Maria immediately moved to my side, rubbing my back, murmuring soothing words. She looked at my mother with barely concealed fury. "Mrs. Brooks," Maria said, her professional voice steady but cold, "your daughter needs surgery. Now. This is not a stomachache. This is a medical emergency. If you can't be supportive, perhaps you should wait outside." Mom's face flushed with indignation. How dare a mere nurse speak to her that way? She turned to Dr. Harrison, expecting him to reprimand Maria, but he simply nodded in agreement. The surgical consent forms appeared, and Mom made a show of reluctance as she signed them. She kept muttering about unnecessary procedures and dramatic daughters. Each word felt like another knife in my gut, adding emotional pain to the physical agony. After signing, she sat back down, but her body language screamed that she wanted to be anywhere else. When an orderly arrived with a gurney to take me to pre-op, I reached out for Mom's hand. It was instinct, the need for maternal comfort when facing something scary. She looked at my outstretched hand like it was contaminated, then pointedly picked up her phone again. Maria took my hand instead, squeezing it gently. "We're going to take good care of you," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." As they wheeled me toward the elevator, I looked back at Mum one more time. She was already walking toward the exit, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling her book club friends to confirm she'd make dinner. The pre-operative area was a controlled chaos of medical professionals preparing multiple patients for surgery. They transferred me to a surgical gurney, and a nurse named Jennifer started preparing me for the procedure. She was young, probably fresh out of nursing school, but her hands were steady and kind as she helped me into a hospital gown. She must have seen something in my face, because she asked if my family was coming to wait during the surgery. "My mother should be here soon," I lied, not wanting to admit that she'd already left. Jennifer smiled and said she'd make sure to update her when I was out of surgery. The anesthesiologist returned to insert an epidural for post-operative pain management. As she worked, she chatted about neutral things, clearly trying to distract me from both the procedure and my apparent absence of family support. But then the doors to pre-op swung open and Mum reappeared. For a brief, foolish moment, my heart lifted. Maybe she'd had a change of heart. Maybe she'd realized how serious this was and come back to be with me, but her expression quickly crushed that hope. She looked annoyed, and she was speaking to someone on her phone while gesturing at the staff to wait. When she finally ended her call, she approached Dr. Harrison, who had just arrived to check on me before surgery. "Let's go home," she announced loudly enough for everyone in pre-op to hear. "She'll be fine. She doesn't need surgery. This is all just a big overreaction." Brooke has always been dramatic about pain. When she was younger, she'd cry over the smallest things just to get attention. The pre-op area went silent. Nurses stopped what they were doing. Other patients turned to stare. Dr. Harrison's face went from professional calm to genuine alarm. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice taking on an urgent tone I'd never heard from him before. "I need you to understand something. Your daughter's appendix is on the verge of rupturing. If we don't operate immediately, she could die. This is not drama. This is not an overreaction. This is a medical emergency." Mum waved her hand dismissively. "You doctors always say someone could die. It's how you justify these expensive procedures. I know my daughter. She's fine. She just wants attention. She's jealous because her sister just got promoted to partner at her law firm, and this is her way of making everything about her again." I was sobbing now, great gasping sobs that made my abdomen hurt even more. Maria, who had followed us to pre-op, stepped forward. Her usual professional composure was gone, replaced by protective fury. "Listen to me," she said to my mother, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "I've been a nurse for 20 years. I've seen appendixes rupture. I've seen young people die from peritonitis because they waited too long. Your daughter is not being dramatic. She is in genuine medical distress and she needs this surgery now." Mum turned to Maria with a sneer. "And what would you know about it? You're just a nurse." My daughter is one too, always dramatizing medical situations, because she thinks she knows everything from her little job. If she dies, she dies. I can't sit here all day waiting for some unnecessary surgery. I have plans. The words, "if she dies, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jennifer, the young nurse, actually gasped. Dr. Harrison's face went pale. Maria's hands clenched into fists. Even the other patients looked shocked. One elderly woman in the next bay called out, "What kind of mother are you?" Mum ignored them all. She turned to me, and the look in her eyes was something I'll never forget. It wasn't just indifference or annoyance, it was almost anticipation, like she was waiting for something. "Brooke, stop this nonsense right now," she said. "Get dressed and let's go home. You're embarrassing both of us with this performance. I couldn't speak through the pain and tears, but I managed to shake my head. Dr. Harrison stepped between Mom and my gurney, Mrs. Brooks, he said, his voice now openly angry. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're interfering with medical care. Your daughter is an adult and has already consented to surgery. If you continue to disrupt this unit, I'll call security. Mom laughed, actually laughed. Fine, she said, picking up her purse. When she ends up with complications from unnecessary surgery, don't come crying to me for help with the medical bills. She looked at me one more time, and her final words before leaving cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. You've always been weak, Brooke. Your father spoiled you, made you think you were special, but you're not. You're just a disappointment who can't even handle a little stomach pain without making it into a production. With that, she walked out, her heels clicking against the floor in a steady rhythm that faded as she moved toward the elevator. The pre-op area remained silent for several long moments after she left. Then Jennifer moved to my side, gently wiping my tears with a tissue. Maria took my hand again, her own eyes wet with unshed tears of rage and sympathy. Dr. Harrison leaned over me, his expression serious but kind. Brooke, he said softly, we need to get you into surgery now. The appendix is very close to rupturing. We can't wait any longer. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to form words through my tears. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, Maria walked alongside, holding my hand until we reached the doors where she couldn't follow. I'll be right here when you wake up, she promised. You're not alone. You have people who care about you, real family, the kind that matters. Her words followed me into the operating room where the bright lights and masked faces waited. The anesthesiologist placed the mask over my face, telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7 before the world went black. Later, Dr. Harrison would tell me that my appendix ruptured the moment he touched it with the laparoscopic instrument. If we'd waited even another hour, if Mum had convinced me to leave, I would have likely died at home. The surgery took longer than expected because they had to clean out the infection that had already started to spread. What should have been a simple 45-minute procedure turned into 2 hours of careful work to save my life. I woke up in recovery 3 hours later, groggy and disoriented. The first face I saw was Maria's, true to her word, sitting beside my bed. She squeezed my hand and smiled, though I could see she'd been crying. You're okay, she said. You're going to be okay. But honey, there were complications. You're going to need to stay in the ICU for a few days. The next 3 days were a blur of antibiotics, pain medication, and careful monitoring. The infection from the ruptured appendix had spread more than they initially thought, and I developed a post-operative infection that required aggressive treatment. Maria stayed with me as much as her shifts allowed, and other nurses from our unit took turns visiting, bringing flowers and cards. But there was no word from Mum or Jessica. On day 3, when I was finally stable enough to be moved to a regular room, I asked Maria to try calling my family. She hesitated, then admitted she'd already tried multiple times. Mum hadn't answered. Jessica's assistant said she was in depositions and couldn't be disturbed. The absence of my family during those critical days hurt almost as much as the physical pain of recovery. On my 5th day in the hospital, I was finally starting to feel human again. The infection was under control and I could walk short distances without feeling like my insides were going to fall out. I was sitting up in bed trying to eat some particularly unappetizing hospital jello when Jessica burst through the door like a hurricane. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled, and her face was a mask of panic and confusion. Brooke, oh my God, Brooke! She practically flew to my bedside, grabbing my hand. What happened? Are you okay? I just found out from Facebook, Amanda, from your unit. Posted about visiting you in the ICU, and I saw it this morning. Mum said you just had minor stomach pain and were being dramatic. She said you were fine. I stared at my sister, trying to process her words. Mum told you I was fine. When did you even talk to her about this? Jessica collapsed into the chair beside my bed, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. She called me the day you went to the hospital. She said you had a stomachache and were demanding unnecessary surgery for attention. She said you were jealous about my promotion and trying to steal the spotlight. The room started spinning slightly, though, whether from my condition or shock I couldn't tell. Jessica, I said slowly, I had emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix. I almost died. I was in the ICU for 3 days with a severe infection. Mum was here. She tried to convince the doctors not to operate. She told them if I died, I died, and then she left. Jessica's face went white. She pulled out her phone and showed me a text conversation with Mum from 5 days ago. Mum's messages said I was having minor stomach discomfort, but was insisting on surgery because I always had to be dramatic. She told Jessica not to worry, that I was just trying to get attention because Jessica had just made partner. The timestamp showed Mum sent these messages while she was supposedly rushing to the hospital to see me. But that's not even the worst part, Jessica said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She glanced at the door, then back at me. Mum's in Las Vegas right now. Has been for 3 days. With Robert Patterson. I stared at her blankly. Who's Robert Patterson? Jessica bit her lip. Her boyfriend. She's had a boyfriend for 6 months and didn't tell either of us. I only found out because I went to the house to check on her after I saw Amanda's post, and the neighbour mentioned seeing Mum leave with some man in a Mercedes. My mind was reeling, but Jessica wasn't done with revelations. After I couldn't find Mum, I called her friend Dorothy from book club. Dorothy said Mum hasn't been to book club in months. She's been lying about where she goes every week. And Brooke. Jessica paused, looking deeply uncomfortable. Dorothy said something else. She said Mum had been asking weird questions about life insurance and inheritance law at their last meeting before she stopped coming. A cold feeling started creeping up my spine. Jessica, what are you trying to say? My sister pulled out her phone again, showing me photos she'd taken. I went through Mum's desk looking for her insurance information to help with your hospital bills. I found these documents. Brooke, did you know Dad left us each $200,000 in a trust? To be distributed when we turn 30, I shook my head slowly. Dad had life insurance, but Mum had always been vague about the details, saying it was all tied up in investments for our future. Jessica showed me a document on her phone, a trust agreement dated a year before Dad's death. It clearly stated that each daughter would receive $200,000 on their 30th birthday, with Linda Brooks serving as trustee until then. But look at this, Jessica said, swiping to another photo. These are withdrawal records. Mum has been taking money from your trust for years. $20,000 here, $30,000 there. She's used almost $160,000 of your money. The car she bought me, that was from your trust. The vacations she's been taking, your money. The renovations on the house last year, all from your inheritance. I felt like I was falling into a deep, dark hole. My whole life I'd wondered why Mum treated me differently, why nothing I did was ever good enough. Now it was becoming horrifyingly clear. But Jessica, why my money and not yours? Jessica's face crumpled. Because she knew I'd never questioned gifts from her. I thought she was just being a loving mother. But for you, if she suddenly started buying you things, you'd wonder why. You'd ask questions. You might even want to see financial records. Maria chose that moment to return from her break, immediately sensing the tension in the room. She looked between Jessica and me, then quietly closed the door behind her. What's going on? I explained what Jessica had discovered, watching Maria's expression shift from confusion to horror to fury. That which Maria breathed. She wanted you to die. If you died before 30, what would happen to the money? Jessica pulled up another document on her phone, her hands shaking. According to the trust, if either beneficiary dies before 30, their share goes to the surviving parent. Mum would get all your remaining money. You turn 30 in 18 months. She was running out of time to use your funds without you finding out. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The sudden warmth 2 months ago, the interest in my life, the specific questions about my health insurance and medical history. She was gathering information, planning something. When I got appendicitis, she saw an opportunity. If she could delay treatment long enough, I might die from complications, and she'd get the remaining $40,000 plus any life insurance from my job. We need to call the police, Maria said firmly. This is attempted murder, or at least criminal neglect and financial fraud. But I was already shaking my head. She's still our mother, I said weakly. Jessica grabbed my hand. No, Brooke. A mother doesn't do this. A mother doesn't steal from one child to give to another. A mother doesn't abandon her daughter during emergency surgery, hoping she'll die. I thought about all the years of feeling inadequate, of wondering what I'd done wrong to deserve her coldness. All the nights I'd cried myself to sleep as a teenager, wishing I could be more like Jessica, believing that if I just tried harder, Mum would love me too. The truth was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that my very existence was an inconvenience to her financial plans. What about the boyfriend? I asked, trying to process everything. Jessica's expression darkened. Robert Patterson is a real estate developer. 62 years old, recently divorced, and apparently very wealthy. The neighbor said she's been seeing him since around the time she started taking larger amounts from your trust. I think she's been using your money to maintain a lifestyle that would attract him. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, the works. I closed my eyes, feeling exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with my physical recovery. When I opened them both, Jessica and Maria were watching me with concern. We need to do something, Jessica said. We can't let her get away with this. She could have killed you, Brooke. She wanted you to die." "I know," I whispered, "but first I need to get better. Then we'll figure out what to do." Jessica nodded, squeezing my hand. She offered to stay the night, but I sent her home to research lawyers who specialize in trust fraud. Maria stayed a bit longer, helping me process everything. Before she left, she hugged me carefully, mindful of my incisions. "You're stronger than you know," she said, "and you have people who really love you. Don't forget that." That night alone in my hospital room, I stared at the ceiling and thought about family. For 28 years, I'd believed blood meant everything. That no matter how badly Mum treated me, she was still my mother, and that had to count for something. But lying there knowing she'd literally walked away hoping I'd die, I realized blood meant nothing if there was no love behind it. 2 weeks later, I was discharged from the hospital. The recovery had been longer than expected due to the infection, but I was finally well enough to go home. Jessica picked me up, having taken the day off work. She'd been visiting every day since discovering the truth, and our relationship had transformed. The sister I'd always felt distanced from had become my fierce protector and advocate. During my recovery, Jessica had been busy. She'd hired a lawyer, Mr. Gregory Thompson, who specialized in trust and estate fraud. She'd gathered all the financial documents from Mum's house while Mum was still in Vegas. She'd even gotten statements from Dorothy and other book club members about Mum's strange questions and behavior. The case we were building was solid and damning. Mr. Thompson had reviewed everything and confirmed our suspicions. Mum had systematically drained my trust fund through unauthorized withdrawals, using her position as trustee to hide the theft. The money had gone toward maintaining her lifestyle, buying gifts for Jessica to maintain the facade of being a generous mother, and recently funding her relationship with Robert. It was textbook breach of fiduciary duty, and with the hospital incident, there was potential for criminal charges of neglect and endangerment. We scheduled a meeting with Mum for the following Monday. Jessica had called her saying it was about my hospital bills and insurance claims. Mum had reluctantly agreed, probably hoping to maintain her image as a concerned mother. She had no idea we knew about the trust fund or that we'd documented her abandonment at the hospital. The meeting was held at Mr. Thompson's office downtown, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Mum arrived 15 minutes late, dressed impeccably as always with Robert in tow. She'd apparently decided to bring reinforcement. Robert was exactly what you'd expect: silver-haired, expensive suit, Rolex gleaming on his wrist. He looked annoyed to be there, checking his phone constantly. Mum's first words when she saw me were not asking how I was feeling. Instead, she said, "I hope this won't take long. Robert and I have theatre tickets." She settled into her chair like a queen granting an audience to peasants. The fact that I'd nearly died 2 weeks ago seemed to have completely slipped her mind, or more likely she simply didn't care. Mr. Thompson began by laying out the facts calmly and methodically. He showed Mum copies of the trust documents, the withdrawal records, and bank statements showing where the money had gone. With each piece of evidence, Mum's perfectly composed face began to crack. When he showed her a printed screenshot of her text to Jessica, claiming I was being dramatic while I was in emergency surgery, she went pale. But the moment that truly destroyed her composure was when Mr. Thompson played the security footage from the hospital. The emergency department had cameras and they'd captured everything. Her saying I was being dramatic, her suggesting we skip surgery, and most damningly, her words, "If she dies, she dies." The audio was crystal clear. Robert, who'd been half paying attention, suddenly sat up straight, staring at Mum in shock. "Linda, what is this?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Mum tried to explain to spin it somehow, but the evidence was overwhelming. Mr. Thompson then presented our demands: full restitution of the stolen funds, immediate transfer of trustee duties to an independent fiduciary, and a written confession of financial fraud. If she refused, we would pursue both civil and criminal charges. Mum turned to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear for me, not remorse for what she'd done, but fear for herself. "Brooke, surely we can work this out as a family. I'm your mother. I gave birth to you, raised you. Doesn't that count for something?" The audacity of her words after everything made my blood boil. I stood up, something I'd never done before when confronting her. "You gave birth to me, yes, but you didn't raise me. Dad did. And after he died, I raised myself while also helping raise Jessica. You took my inheritance, the money Dad left to secure my future, and you used it to fund your lifestyle. Worse, when I was dying, you walked away hoping I wouldn't survive, so you could take the rest." Jessica stood beside me, taking my hand. "Mum," she said quietly, "I've been doing research. The car you bought me, the vacation to Europe, my graduation party, it all came from Brooke's money. You let me think you were being generous when you were actually stealing from my sister. How could you do that? How could you make me an unknowing accomplice in your theft? Robert had been growing increasingly uncomfortable and finally stood. Linda, I think we should go. This is clearly a family matter that needs resolution. The way he looked at Mom had changed completely. The charm she'd used my money to purchase had evaporated in the face of the ugly truth. He left without another word, and from the finality in his departure, it was clear their relationship was over. Mum started crying then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. You've ruined everything, she wailed. Robert was going to propose. We were going to travel, enjoy life. Now you've destroyed it all just like you always do, Brooke. You've always been jealous of the attention Jessica gets, and now you're trying to punish me for being a good mother to at least one of my daughters. The delusion in her words was breathtaking. Even faced with irrefutable evidence of her crimes, she was still trying to paint herself as the victim. Mr. Thompson intervened, his voice professional but firm. Mrs. Brooks, you have 48 hours to respond to our demands. If we don't receive a satisfactory response, we will file charges. I suggest you consult with your own attorney. Mum stood to leave, and I thought that would be it. But at the door she turned back one more time. Her mask had completely fallen away, revealing the cold, calculating person she'd always been beneath the suburban mother facade. You want to know the truth, Brooke? You were never supposed to happen. I was done after Jessica. But your father insisted on trying for a boy. Instead, we got you. Another girl, another disappointment. At least Jessica had the decency to be pretty and charming. You were just work, extra expense, a burden. The words should have hurt, but instead they freed me. For the first time I understood that her treatment of me had never been about my inadequacies. It had been about her resentment, her greed, her narcissism. I looked her straight in the eye and said the last words I would ever speak to her: I'm not your burden anymore. I'm not your disappointment. I'm a survivor, and I'm done letting you define my worth. She left, then her heels clicking on the marble floor one last time. Jessica and I stood together, both of us processing the end of our family as we'd known it. But as Mr. Thompson reminded us, we still had each other. And sometimes the family you choose and build is stronger than the one you're born into. Over the next week, Mum tried everything. She called relatives spinning tales of ungrateful daughters. She posted on social media about being persecuted by her children. She even showed up at my apartment building, but the security guard, whom I'd already briefed, wouldn't let her in. Finally faced with the reality of criminal charges and public humiliation, she agreed to our terms. The process of recovering my money was slow but steady. Mum had to sell the renovations she'd made to the house, take out a loan, and liquidate some of her own investments. Jessica insisted on returning the car Mum had bought with my money, even though I told her she didn't have to. She said she couldn't drive it knowing where the money had come from. We sold it and split the proceeds, using some to buy her a modest used car that was truly hers. Mr. Thompson managed to recover about $120,000 of the stolen $160. The rest was gone spent on things that couldn't be recouped. But having the majority back, plus gaining full control of the remaining $40,000 in the trust, meant I could finally have the financial security Dad had intended for me. 6 months have passed since that terrible day in the hospital. The scars from my surgery have faded to thin white lines barely visible unless you know where to look. The emotional scars are still healing, but they're getting better every day. I've learnt that healing isn't linear. Some days are harder than others, especially when I see mothers and daughters laughing together at the coffee shop or when someone asks about my family. I returned to work at the hospital 2 months after my surgery. My first day back, the entire cardiac unit had decorated my workspace with balloons and welcome back signs. Dr. Harrison stopped by to check on me, and we talked about that day in the emergency department. He told me that in his 20 years of practice, he'd never seen anything like my mother's behavior. He also told me something that stuck with me: the fact that I'd turned out to be a caring, compassionate nurse, despite having a mother like that, was a testament to my strength, not her parenting. Maria and I have become even closer. She invited me to Thanksgiving with her family, and for the first time in years, I experienced what a real family holiday felt like. Her 3 teenagers had heard about me from their mum and immediately adopted me as an honorary aunt. Her husband Carlos made sure my plate was never empty, and her mother, who spoke limited English but had the warmest smile, kept patting my hand and calling me Mija. When Maria's youngest daughter asked why I was crying during dinner, I couldn't explain that they were tears of joy at experiencing the unconditional acceptance I'd never known. Jessica and I have built an entirely new relationship. Without Mum's toxic influence poisoning our dynamic, we've discovered we actually like each other. We meet for coffee every Saturday morning, taking turns picking new places to try. She's working through her own guilt about unknowingly benefiting from Mum's theft, even though I've told her repeatedly it wasn't her fault. We're both in therapy separately, and sometimes together, working through the trauma of our childhood and the recent revelations. Last month, Jessica called me crying. She'd been going through old boxes in her apartment and found a journal Dad had kept. In it, he'd written about his concerns regarding Mum's treatment of me, his plans to address it, and his hopes for both his daughters. One entry dated just a week before his death said Brooke has the strongest spirit I've ever seen. Linda doesn't see it, but that girl is going to change the world with her compassion. I need to make sure she knows how proud I am of her. Reading his words was like receiving a message from beyond confirmation that someone had seen me, valued me, loved me for exactly who I was. I've used some of my recovered inheritance to go back to school. I'm getting my master's degree to become a nurse practitioner, something I'd always dreamed of but never thought I could afford. The program is challenging, but my colleagues at the hospital are supportive, adjusting schedules when I have classes and helping me with study materials. Dr. Harrison wrote me a glowing recommendation letter, saying my experience as both a nurse and a patient would make me an exceptional practitioner. I also started volunteering with a support group for people who've experienced family trauma and financial abuse. It's more common than people think, family members stealing from each other, using emotional manipulation to control money and assets. Sharing my story has helped others feel less alone, less crazy for suspecting their loved ones of terrible things. The group facilitator, a social worker named Patricia, says my willingness to be vulnerable helps others open up about their own experiences. 3 months ago, I met David. He's a physical therapist at the hospital, someone I'd seen around but never really talked to before my surgery. He was assigned to help with my post-operative recovery when I was still inpatient, and his gentle encouragement and terrible jokes made the painful process of getting mobile again bearable. After I returned to work, he started finding excuses to visit the cardiac unit. It took him 3 weeks to work up the courage to ask me to coffee. David knows my whole story. I told him on our 3rd date, expecting him to run for the hills when he heard about my mother attempting to let me die for money. Instead, he reached across the table, took my hand, and said that my ability to still trust people after that betrayal was remarkable. He's met Jessica and Maria, and both approve wholeheartedly. He doesn't try to fix my trauma or pretend it doesn't affect me. He just stands beside me steady and sure, reminding me that I deserve love without conditions or ulterior motives. As for Mum, I have no idea where she is or what she's doing. Jessica heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to Arizona after selling the house to pay back what she stole. Apparently, Robert told his entire social circle about what happened, effectively destroying her reputation in the Seattle area. Sometimes I wonder if she ever feels remorse, if she ever lies awake at night, thinking about that day in the hospital when she walked away from her dying daughter. But I've learned that seeking answers to those questions only causes more pain. What I've learned through all of this is that family isn't about blood or obligation or maintaining appearances. Family is about showing up. It's Maria sitting beside my hospital bed for hours missing her own family dinner to make sure I wasn't alone. It's Jessica confronting uncomfortable truths and choosing justice over comfort. It's my colleagues donating their sick days so I could recover without worrying about income. It's David bringing me soup when I'm studying late and reminding me to take breaks. The money Dad left me has given me financial security, but the real inheritance I received from this whole ordeal was freedom. Freedom from seeking approval that was never going to come. Freedom from believing I was inherently flawed or unworthy. Freedom from the toxic cycle of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I still have the cashmere scarf I bought for Mom that Thanksgiving. I found it in my closet last week while cleaning. For a moment I considered donating it, but instead I gave it to Maria. She wears it on cold days, and every time I see it, I'm reminded not of the mother who failed me, but of the chosen mother who stepped up when I needed one most. My story isn't unique. There are countless people out there who've been betrayed by those who should have protected them. But here's what I want you to know: if you're one of them, you are not responsible for their inability to love you properly. You are not defined by their rejection or their cruelty. You have the power to build a life filled with genuine love and respect, even if you have to create it from scratch. Now, when people ask about my family, I tell them about Maria, who held my hand through surgery when my biological mother walked away. I tell them about Jessica, who chose truth over comfort and stood by me even though it meant confronting painful realities. I tell them about David, who shows me daily what unconditional love looks like. I tell them about my work family, who rallied around me during the darkest period of my life. Sometimes the family we choose is more real than the one we're born into. The scars on my abdomen remind me that I'm a survivor in more ways than one. I survived a ruptured appendix, yes, but more importantly, I survived a mother who saw my life as disposable. And not only did I survive, I thrived. I found my voice, my worth, and my true family. That's the real miracle. Not that I lived through the surgery, but that I lived through the abandonment and came out stronger. If you've experienced something similar, if someone who should have loved you chose greed over your well-being, know that their failure reflects on them, not you. You deserve love without conditions, support without manipulation, and family who celebrate your existence rather than resent it. It might not come from where you expected, but it will come. Trust in that. Trust in yourself, and never ever let anyone convince you that you're not worth saving. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you've experienced family betrayal yourself, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. How did you rebuild after your trust was broken? Who became your chosen family? Please like this video. If it touched you, subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph, and share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggle. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply survive and tell our story. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.